Hey everybody, what's going on? Thanks for stopping by. Found an interesting story here I'd like to offer some thoughts on. Um, the Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name. I'm trying to learn Spanish, but I'm not very far along yet. So, not so the pronunciation's probably fucking me a bit. But in a very surprise visit, apparently, to Beijing, the Filipino president Duterte announced that he wanted to start shifting the Philippines into the orbit and the sphere of influence of China, as opposed to the United States. Um, Now, this is pretty shocking for a couple reasons. Number one is that the Philippines and the United States have had some of the longest standing military and economic, as well as some cultural ties for most of the 20th century and into the 21st century. As I hope a lot of people know, the Philippines was a colony of the United States for about 50 years after the Spanish-American War. Following World War II, I think it was 1947, might have been 1946 or 7. Shortly after the Second World War, the Philippines was made independent, but even so, it's still one of our, militarily and economically speaking, one of our most uh, closest countries in those regards. It's right up there with South Korea, Japan, and Germany when it comes to coordination of military and military affairs. I mean, we have several bases in the Philippines, so it's kind of been one of the most dependable state actors in the East Asia region for um, uh, I guess most of modern recent history. So, if you don't know, before this, Duterte also had gotten in the news a couple times for making a lot of crude comments towards Obama, something I'm perfectly understanding of because I make crude comments towards Obama all the time. Calling him the son of a whore, saying that he was not going to be a puppet of the United States. And this meeting is mostly symbolic because Duterte does not have the legislative or executive, excuse me, authority to bring the Philippines into the orbit of China by himself. He needs the he needs the support of the Filipino uh, parliament in order to get anything renegotiated when it comes to the bilateral agreements that the U.S. and the Philippines have made, and have some of them were made in the 40s and have still been upheld for a very long time. So yeah, this is so that's one of the reasons why it's surprising. The other reason why it's very surprising is because China has been trying to expand its influence in the South China Sea. You know, trying to get itself kind of broken out of that, I guess, ring of countries around it that kind of limit its capacity to project power into the rest of the world. And it's been looking for a way to get out of this circle of, hostile to fearful states. And the way they've been trying to do this is expand influence and control, ownership would be the better word, of the South China Sea. It's aside from Syria, it's probably the second biggest hotspot currently in the world. There was a couple months ago. There was a convention at the Hague. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Um, where they overlooked the case and they said that China did not have legitimate claims into the South China Sea. Beijing rejected it, said that that they were. I think they complained that they were foreigners and they didn't really have any say in what went on in Asia, or they shouldn't have a say in what went on in Asia to begin with. Um, so yeah, the relationship between the Philippines and China has been very strained because some of those islands in the South China Sea are claimed by the Philippines and China both. So this kind of shift away from the U.S. has caught a lot of people off guard. Again, I'll say that there hasn't been any official renegotiations that have started yet. And it doesn't seem to be, from what I can tell, what I've just been reading on a few websites, that the actual Filipino people are universally in favor of this. It doesn't seem to be. Well, there certainly is kind of uh, anti-American sounds so fucking cliche, but there's people in the Philippines who don't like the United States, who would rather our countries be more separate, which I'm totally fine with. Which brings me to my point that I really wanted to make here. This is probably something I need to go into a video in and of itself, because it's a very big topic, but I'm a pretty staunchly opposed to American imperialism. Which I guess might surprise some people because I'm not on the left, and this was traditionally something the left was the real voice against in recent politics, at least in the culture. The Democrats have never particularly been anti-war. In fact, I think most of the wars of the 20th century were started by Democrats, or at least we got involved in most of them. I'm trying to think: Woodrow Wilson, Lyndon B. Johnson, a couple of them. Yeah, I can name a few. So yeah, I think it's probably impossible for us, or specifically for our government, our federal government, to really contain China for very much longer. And the reason I think that this is symbolic is because, or I should say, it's just symbolic of a greater trend, is because there's no benefit per se, I don't see, of Duterte kind of making this very public and very clear declaration of preference for China over the United States. For everyone to hear. No suggestions, no murkiness around the issue. He wants to bring the Philippines into the orbit of China. I don't think there's. If this is something that the Filipino government is going to support, the rest of their government, I don't think there's a whole lot the United States can really do to negotiate them back. I mean, ever since the Cold War, our legitimacy as a world leader has been destroyed and eroded away because of all the ridiculous and insane decisions made by our by our federal government. It's completely soiled our name. Maybe the line in the silver lining in the sky is that this might be for the best. China is a world power. It is the second biggest world power currently around. There's no way. There have been mistakes made by the Chinese government, specifically when it comes to the one-child policy. That's going to have very terrible ramifications for their society in the future. But we're not in much better shape. And this idea, that we can be all over the world, that there's nothing else, no other state actor that can challenge our position. It was a nice little spot in the sun, but it clearly didn't last very long. And I think the United States, what we can do as citizens to convince our government to start pulling back from regions that are maybe not that vital to our interest. I'm not saying Asia is not a vital interest. I'd actually say it's probably one of our most vital interests in terms of the economic importance of East Asia to the world. It's probably going to be the biggest. It's going to have almost certainly the biggest gains in the coming century. I definitely think the financial centers will definitely shift away from Europe. If we don't make smart decisions in the future, they also will definitely shift away from the United States, and they'll go to East Asia. And China is the power of the region. I think we need to start, drawing some lines and redefining what our areas of influence are. And if we don't have the Philippines as kind of a key player on our side, it's unlikely that we can, in my personal layman opinion, it's unlikely that we'll be able to sustain a long-term sphere of influence over East Asia any longer. I'd rather us stay influential in East Asia because I don't trust the Chinese government at all. I'm not apologizing for China. I'm just recognizing that they're not really a power to be played with. There's lots of places in the world that I don't like, that I don't support, that I wish the regimes would collapse and something better and more humanitarian, for lack of a better term, would come in to replace it, which I hope in the case of China. But they're not going anywhere. I think it's time for us to maybe start reconsidering, where our true interests and what our most important priorities are on the world stage, and specifically not just the priorities that work in favor of neoconservative ideology, or what the interests of the special elite, the oligarchic controllers of our federal government and what they want. No, how does it actually benefit us to be involved in the Middle East, in Europe, and in East Asia? So I don't know, maybe I'm going to follow this story. I'll report on it. Report, like I'm a real fucking reporter. I'll talk about it in the future to see if it goes anywhere. It might have just been bluffing on Duterte's part, but I think it certainly does show that the times are changing if he feels this emboldened and this comfortable making such a public claim. The Chinese seem very happy about it, which I imagine they should be, because if the Philippines can leave the orbit of the United States, then they essentially break the circle of small states that has been kind of the strategy that Obama has been pursuing in East Asia. Instead of trying to find one big country to counter China, like Russia or India, and teaming up with them, it's been more to work with the smaller states and have kind of a coalition from Japan to Vietnam, all kind of more aligned towards us than China. I suppose we can't really do that for much longer, especially not if the Philippines leaves our sphere of influence and enters the Chinese sphere. I guess one reason I don't find that very likely is because there's a couple million Filipinos living in the United States, and a large number of them make a lot of remittance payments back into the Philippines, which is a pretty big significant part of their economy. I think the short-term losses that would result in kind of our souring of relations might be a bit too much for the Filipino government to stomach, even if there might be more investment opportunities coming from Beijing. And I also mentioned that I have no idea what the public perception among the Filipino people is. I mean, he won the race, and assuming it's not rigged like our elections, and they're open and free, I'm assuming he must have some amount of popularity. So I don't know if this is a widely shared sentiment among the Filipino people. Probably hope not. I don't mind Filipinos. They seem kind of nice. Seem like nice people to me. I think that's about all I have to say, guys. Take care. Peace.